Welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to dive right into something that is absolutely fascinating. We are exploring how the desolate, bone-chilling extremes of the Arctic became highly politicized, militarized, and heavily mythologized laboratories during the 20th century. For most of human history, the polar regions were just seen as these vast, untamable voids. But as we're going to see, the dawn of the nuclear age and the rise of global superpowers completely changed all of that. It literally transformed the ice into a massive battleground of engineering, ideology, and sheer human endurance. Just listen to this quote for a second. Last night in Antarctica, nuclear power lit the bulb, heated the room, fried the eggs, boiled the coffee, kept the scientific instruments running, burned the toast. That is an actual 1962 advertisement promoting a nuclear power plant at the U.S. Antarctic station McMurdo. The confidence there is just staggering, right? Frying eggs and burning toast at the absolute end of the Earth, it perfectly captures the surreal hubris of the Cold War era, this complete delusion that sheer technological might could completely conquer the most hostile environment on our planet, allowing humans to basically live as comfortably as they would in a suburban kitchen. All right, let's start unpacking this with Section 1, the frozen frontier.
To really understand this, we're going to rely heavily on John McCannon's brilliant historical analysis from his 1998 monograph, Red Arctic. McCannon details how the Soviet Union made these extraordinary, almost unbelievable efforts to conquer their northern territories back in the 1930s. And we're not talking about casual exploration here. This was a massively funded, state-directed mission to exploit the Arctic for economic and strategic gain. At the heart of it was this gigantic state agency known as Glavsevmorput, the main administration of the Northern Sea Route, which essentially attempted to exert total control over millions of square miles of deeply hostile, almost alien landscape.
Under Glavsevmorput, they rapidly set up 77 different stations across the icy seas, stretching from the Barents Sea all the way to the Bering Sea, mostly to forecast weather and map shipping routes. But you have to imagine the sheer isolation of these outposts. In fact, that isolation bred an environment of absolute suspense and dread. Take the extremely eerie, unsolved mystery of the Vaygach Island radio station. In late October of 1934, this remote relay post suddenly ceased all transmissions. Complete silence. 19 days of nothing but static. Finally, the icebreaker Rusanov was dispatched from Arkhangelsk, breaching the dark, freezing waters to investigate. When they arrived, they found the four-man crew totally alive but completely unable or unwilling to account for the 19-day gap. Their logbooks recorded perfectly routine entries right up until day 1 of the blackout, and then, completely inexplicably, resumed without a single annotation on day 20. It's incredibly chilling. This entire incident was just quietly filed under Glavsevmorput operational records, only surfacing as a marginal entry in a 1938 internal audit that McCannon published in Red Arctic. The spookiest part? The archival records show that right after the blackout, the crew was mysteriously reassigned to totally unrelated postings across 3 different oblasts, all in the exact same administrative quarter, suggesting a level of deliberate coordination that the official record simply does not explain.
That sense of human vulnerability leads us right into Section 2, Heroes of the Ice. Picture this. It's February 1934, and the crushing winter ice of the Chukchi Sea literally buckles and destroys the steel hull of the Soviet ship, the Chelyuskin. The ship goes down, and suddenly 104 people, including women and children, are left stranded out on the frozen ocean. Their leader, Professor Otto Schmidt, had to make the better best of a bad jam, as the saying goes, by rapidly organizing a survival camp on shrinking ice floes. They carved airstrips out of the snow and built makeshift barracks, surviving for months before a truly historic, heroic aerial rescue by Soviet pilots miraculously saved absolutely everyone. But here is the thing you have to understand. These harrowing survival stories weren't just scientific expeditions. They were supreme propaganda tools. Take the 1937 North Pole drift, for example. Led by Ivan Papanin, a 4-man crew famously known as the Papanitites lived on a drifting ice floe for 9 solid months, conducting research while constantly battling the elements. The Soviet state heavily leveraged men like this. They turned them into national heroes to mythologize the conquest of nature, basically trying to prove to the whole world that their political system could produce literal supermen capable of mastering the Arctic. But behind the scenes, things were taking a very dark turn. Section 3, the Stalinist purges.
So as the late 1930s roll in, the brutal reality of the Arctic violently collides with the sheer paranoia of the state. During the Great Terror, natural disasters, broken down equipment, or missed quotas out on the ice were no longer just written off as bad luck or logistical headaches. Suddenly, a ship getting caught in early winter ice was viewed as deliberate sabotage. It was labeled as wrecking, which was punishable by exile to the gulag or even execution. The very real, everyday struggle against the ice became entirely criminalized, casting a net of oppressive psychological terror over the entire frozen expanse.
And honestly, nothing shows this tragic, fatal absurdity better than the so-called Wrangel Mammoth Affair. In October of 1937, a station had excitedly radioed in that they'd found a perfectly preserved mammoth skeleton up on Wrangel Island. Moscow was thrilled, right? They scrambled to send a massive scientific expedition by early 1938, expecting this huge paleontological triumph. But when they get there, they realize it is literally just a washed-up whale carcass that had been misidentified in the snow. An innocent, albeit very embarrassing mistake. But the secret police didn't see it that way. They investigated, labeled the station head and the party organizer as wreckers for wasting state resources, and swiftly executed both of them. This intense environment of fear had really been cemented a couple years earlier by the 1936 Semenchuk trial. The head of the Wrangel station was dragged back to Moscow and put on trial for charges of banditism and the murder of local personnel. And who prosecuted it? The infamous Andrei Vyshinsky. This trial actually served as a terrifying, high-profile dress rehearsal for the major Moscow show trials that would soon sweep through the rest of the Soviet Union. It sent a very clear, very loud message. The lethal arm of the state could and would reach all the way to the frozen edges of the earth. Let's shift gears now and look at the post-war era. Section 4, Cold War Ice Laboratories.
As the Cold War ramped up, the superpowers viewed this ice completely differently. We've seen how the Soviets historically built a whole mythos around their explorers, often trying to integrate with local populations. But the US military? They approached the Arctic essentially as terra nullius, an empty, unclaimed void. To them, it wasn't a place for romantic heroes and furs. It was basically a blank canvas, completely ripe for massive, hyper-modern military engineering projects. This mindset resulted in absolutely massive undertakings, like Operation Blue Jay in the early 1950s. Operating under total secrecy, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers shocked the local Inuit hunter cultures in Greenland by rapidly constructing an $800 million nuclear-age bomber base at Thule. To put that into perspective, they practically dropped a small, fully functioning American city right onto the ice. It had a cinema, advanced radar telecommunications, and a sprawling 3-kilometer landing strip. Why? Because if you look across the top of the globe, Thule put American bombers well within striking distance of the Soviet Union.
But this engineering hubris completely peaked with Camp Century. Following those same assumptions that the Arctic was just empty, controllable space, the U.S. military literally carved a secret, futuristic, nuclear-powered missile base deep inside the Greenland ice sheet itself. They hollowed out tunnels right out of the frost. They genuinely assumed they could tame the environment. But they completely ignored the violent, unstoppable kinetics of the ice. The ice sheet behaves like a slow-moving river, and within just a few years, millions of tons of pressure physically crushed those steel tunnels, completely destroying the base and forcing the military to abandon the entire multi-million-dollar project.
Which brings us to our final point. Section 5, the cost of conquest.
So, what does this all mean for us today? After hundreds of millions of dollars spent, after those incredible tales of heroic survival, and the deeply tragic political executions, we have to look back at this history and ask a final critical question. As we face our own modern climate challenges and inevitably look to conquer new extremes, we have to look at the crushed, abandoned ruins of Camp Century, buried deep in Greenland, or the sunken hull of the Chaluskin resting quietly at the bottom of the Chukchi Sea, and ask ourselves, did humanity ever truly conquer the ice? Or does the ice inevitably always win?